Well, hello, it's Mike with Litchfield Beekeeping. This is going to be the first of videos that we're going to be doing for documenting our first year of beekeeping. Like so many out there, we thought it would be a good idea for us to videotape our experiences, partly for ourselves, but partly for others that can learn from our mistakes. Let's tackle the obvious here. Yes, I'm in the kitchen. For those that are probably wondering whether or not my wife is okay with this, she is, although she's not here today. She's out with her sister. But I do have her permission. So the first thing I thought I would talk about, since I've already really built most of our bee boxes, is talk about frame assembly. And as most of you know, or those that don't, assembling frames one by one, it takes a long time for that to happen. So I looked online and noticed that there's some jigs out there you can purchase. I think Van Lake has some. Actually, I think most of the big manufacturers or big suppliers have them. I decided I would make my own based off of some that I saw online. So I started out with figuring out what the size was that I needed. So a little bit of disclosure here. Make sure that you are paying attention to what the actual sizes should be. This box was actually intended to be a 10 frame jig, which is because we're using 10 frames in our bee boxes. And you'll note that I actually have 10 top bars in here. Well, as it turns out, you can't just measure the top bars and get your measurements for your parts here, because what happens is you actually need to account for the top bar as well as the side rail, and as you'll see that there is a difference. So the measurements I'm going to give you are for what actually turns out to be an 8 frame jig, but I'll also give you the measurements for the 10 frame jig, which I plan on building eventually. Actually kind of works out. My sister-in-law and her husband are doing bees this year as well, and they're doing 8 frame boxes, so this will be a gift for them when we're done putting all of our frames together. So let's talk a little bit about the size of this. For an 8 frame, and I'll talk 8 frame, but I'll also give the 10 frame as we go by. What I did is I actually went to the store and purchased some pretty decent lumber. At the box stores, you're going to pay premium for this clear lumber, which you do. So that's what I have, is some clear here. It's a 1x. This particular stock, I believe, is a 1x5, which actually turns out to be 3/4 by 4.5. So think of that when you're doing your measurements. This rail here, from here to here, is actually 17 7/8 inches long. That works to allow you to put the end frame parts in there and to span the distance for your top and bottom. The side rails here are 12 7/8 inches is what I decided to go with. This gave me enough clearance inside to work a little bit, and you'll see when I actually use it to put the frames together. So 12 7/8 inches on these end rails. If you're going to do the 10 frame, it's going to be 15 5/8. That's at least the measurement that I'm going to use. Again, this gives us a little bit of wiggle room to move around. And then you have the cutouts. And these cutouts, hopefully you can see this without me adjusting the camera too much. But the cutouts are for whatever size of rail that you need to actually hold your product in. So let me get these out of the way here, and I'll show you what that looks like. So the cutouts that I use are based off the size of actual wood that I had laying around. In this case, I think this was 2.5 inches is what I had. The size of this opening is actually 1.25 inches because of the thickness of your material, and then a little bit proud of the 2.5 inch wood. This allows you to slide it in and have some space so that you're not really pinched in there. And the way that this works is putting your end pieces in here like so. You get your 8, you can if you happen to measure things appropriately. And then what I use is some plastic shims that I got at the box store, and that just goes in here like this and holds the material pretty well. Do the same to the other end there. It's worked out pretty well. We've put together quite a number of frames already. I still have quite a bit to go. We're going to be doing 2 hives this year, so you figured the frames that you need for the brood boxes as well as your supers. And we're planning on multiple supers, but I also made sure that we are building frames to handle any changes that we need. I want to make sure that I have the equipment here in case I need it. I don't want to have to wait and run into problems, so we'll have some extra stuff here. So I'm going to turn off the video, and then we'll come back with how you actually use the jig to assemble the frames. All right, we're back, and we're going to be assembling some of these frames. I wanted to point out that this jig, because of its size, can be used for both the frames for your medium boxes as well as your deep boxes. I don't plan on using the small box, the very shallow box, so I'm not too sure how that's going to work. I assume it would work, but it would be pretty close. So we do know that it does work with these dimensions with the deeps and the mediums. Now, I know that there's probably going to be a lot of people that they have their ways of doing things, and I'm finding that's pretty true with most beekeepers or people that keep bees, that they've learned a certain way and that's the way they like to do things. Others are kind of making it up as they go, and that's kind of where I'm at this point. I will be gluing these together, as well as using 1/4 inch crown staples. The reason I'm using the 1/4 inch crown staples is because that's the staple gun that I had. If I were to do things differently, I think I would go with a 1/2 inch crown staple to assemble these together. But I actually also use a finish nailer. So let's get started. I start out by putting some glue, and I do like this brand of glue. I use it for most of my woodworking projects. And you want to make sure you get enough on there, but you don't get so much that you're having to clean up a bunch of run on the glue surfaces. And because this is a jig, you can get everything together at once. And it allows you to go pretty quickly. The product that I'm using, I tell you that originally my plan was, because I do like woodworking, is to go out and purchase a whole bunch of wood and make my own jigs and make my own bee equipment. But I quickly found out that we would go broke doing that. In order to get some really good wood, you have to spend a lot of money, and then it becomes a little bit of cost prohibitive. So initially I started dealing with a local beekeeping supply, but then I found that being in Ohio, we have a lot of Amish around this area, and not too far south of us we have an Amish gentleman that makes bee equipment, and so I went and I purchased pretty much everything that we have in woodware from that guy, and really cost effective, really good product. I really like it. Things seem to go together very well, and we saved a bunch of money. Okay, so a little bit of noise here. For those that don't use power tools too much, make sure you read your instructions to make sure that you're following all the safety protocol. Make sure that you're safe, make sure you're wearing your eye protection, and so on and so forth. So we'll go through these pretty quick. I will tell you that this particular stapler that I have pretty inexpensive. And if I was inclined to purchase another one, I don't know if I'd go with this particular one. It's pretty cheap. But you have to watch and make sure that you're actually getting staples come out. Sometimes it's a little finicky. I've seen some videos out there where people have decided they're timing themselves on this. I think that's probably not the best thing to do unless we're in a race. You know, you should be taking your time and making sure that this is done properly. Even taking your time, you're going to come up with some situations working with air nailers or air staplers where you have a staple or a nail that goes a little errant. You see that I have to restaple in some cases because of this. Wasn't that enjoyable? So the nice thing about this jig is that you could just flip the thing over and all your parts stay where they need to be. Now some would just go ahead and put the bottom bar on. With the medium box frames, I actually like to put the foundation in. I'm using a plastic foundation, again from the gentleman that I got the woodware from. I'm happen to use this plastic stuff again. New to beekeeping, I'm sure there's people out there hollering that this is not the right thing to use and that I'm going to have problems. Well, that's what we're going to learn about this year. So, there's also a lot of different brands out there. This happens to be the one that I am using. I will put that brand down at the bottom of the video so you can see what that is. Interestingly, we've actually had a couple different brands. We've had this and we've had some other ones. This particular brand has an unbelievable a honey smell to the wax that's on it. And when these foundations sit in the kitchen for a while, the kitchen starts smelling like honey, which is great, unless you're my daughters who apparently don't like the smell of honey for some odd reason. So I'm going to show you putting just a couple of these together. And then I'm going to stop the video and show you what I do next step. Again, using just a little bit of glue, making sure that you're not running over. You'll probably note that on the top rail I used 2 staples. On the bottom rail, because of the size, I'm only going to be using 1 staple. And it has to be, using this this particular staple, it has to be to offset a little bit, or you'll run into some problems with that bottom rail. So I'll get together these few. And as I said, I'll just do a couple of these, and then stop the video, and we will show you the next step and the reason we have that next step. Now using, putting the foundation in right now is actually something that's going to take a little bit more time, making sure that you get it in both the top and bottom groove. So if I'm trying to rush through this, this would hold you up quite a bit. But again, I'm not rushing. This makes it quicker for me in the long run, but there's no particular race I'm trying to win here. will also be my first set of videos that I've ever posted on anything, so let me know how that turns out. Using a new GoPro Hero camera. Again, the first video that I shot with it was the first part that you saw earlier, so we're starting to learn that type of equipment also. Okay, so that's that. As I said, when we staple these on here, it would be a little bit off center. Something that if you were using maybe a half-inch crown staple, maybe you wouldn't have to deal with. But I found that I had to deal with it because of what actually happens. With this jig, there's just a little bit of slop in it, so what you kind of need to make sure that you can move them about. But what happens is these have a tendency to splay a little bit at the top, so you need to make sure that you're pushing in and everything's fitting properly. I guess I'm actually going to do them all. Stop the video. Okay. So that's assembling them, and then I use a finish nailer to put one more fastener in. And the reason we put the fastener in is, my understanding is, when we get honey on these frames, there's a tad bit of weight, and as you're lifting these out of your boxes, things aren't assembled properly, you have the risk of this thing coming apart. So I'm going to actually put a finish nail through here, so it'll actually kind of come up. I'll use this as an example. Kind of come up as at an angle like this to kind of help keep the top frame together. Let me adjust this just a little bit. Hopefully there's not too much in the way of blur from the sun. A little bit of sun we're getting today. So that's really all I'm looking to do, is to put one nail in there. Putting it on each side. Again, right, kind of off at the end, off one side I should say. And one other thing you should think about when you're doing this, which I've learned, sometimes you actually hit the staple in the top, and then you got a problem. What I've seen is it actually redirects the nail when it goes in, and a lot of times it shoots it up, so we've had to make some adjustments with that. So that's the frame jig and assembling a few medium frames. hopefully in a couple months. This is actually the last day of February in 2016, but in a month and a half we should have our bees, and we'll see how they like the plastic frames and how they like their new bee boxes. Again, this is Mike with Litchfield Beekeeping. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll have some future videos out, probably putting some other equipment together. And then as we get our bees, hiving those, we're actually going to be doing two different types. We're going to be doing the package bee in one hive and then a nook in the other one. Thanks. Have a great day.